Chapter 11, May 30, 1862. The secret orders from General McClellan were clear and concise. Upon advancing beyond the Chickahominy, the troops will go prepared for battle at a moment's notice. All vehicles will be left on the eastern side of the river, with the exception of ambulances. The men will leave their knapsacks with the wagons and will carry 3 days' rations. Arms will be put in perfect order. All cartridge cases will carry 40 rounds, with 20 additional rounds carried by the men in their pockets. Commanders of batteries will see that limber and caisson boxes are filled to their utmost capacity. With the bridge completed and all preparations made, the Army of the Potomac launched its big attack on the nerve center of the Confederate government. Private Thompson and his fellow soldiers were hoping for a quick, clean victory, but that wasn't to be. The Southern troops, fighting for a cause they believed noble and just, resisted fiercely. For days the battle raged back and forth in and around the river. Finally, a Union corps under General Fitzjohn Porter won several key victories and cut the railroad lines carrying supplies to Richmond. Things looked promising for McClellan until nature took an unexpected hand. A great storm hit the peninsula. Sheets of rain fell night and day, flooding the valley and turning the calm river into a raging torrent. Mud on the Richmond road was over a foot deep. The storm badly damaged the new Union Bridge and wrecked a second bridge that was being built. By June, the rebels had been well reinforced and were able to counterattack. The Union troops lost ground before Richmond, and the battlefield became fragmented, with pockets of men fighting everywhere. During those weeks, Private Thompson's work took a new turn. Headquarters had been impressed with his success as a spy and also with his horsemanship. He was a fine rider, skilled and daring, and good messengers were badly needed. So, to the complete annoyance of Dr. Hodes, Frank Thompson was again called from the hospital, this time to be a special courier for the Union generals who were directing the confused fighting. Mounted on Rebel, Private Thompson traveled the countryside for days, carrying orders and dispatches through swamp and mud, over rain-drenched fields, and across streams swollen into rivers. Rebel was equal to every demand made on him, and Thompson enjoyed the excitement of his role. He also had his share of narrow escapes. Once, coming back from a mission, the courier fell in with a Union cavalry patrol. There were 4 troopers, and Franklin was glad to have company. Suddenly, shots flew at them from nearby foliage. The patrol was being ambushed, not by the enemy, but by a band of renegade soldiers. Renegades, found on both sides, were armed guerrilla bands who operated without orders, completely on their own. Also called bushwhackers, they were supposed to be partisans of either North or the South, but most of the time they were merely pirates, preying on civilians and soldiers, killing, robbing, and looting for their own gain. Private Thompson and his cavalry friends were outnumbered, but in the confusion were able to fight their way out of the trap. Several of the men were wounded, and Rebel received a gash across his flank, but he managed to limp back to camp with Franklin, where his minor wound was lovingly attended to. Another time, heading home near Rebel territory, Thompson decided to take a shortcut. Riding through an unfamiliar area, he somehow lost his way. Then, from across a large open field, he spotted a column of Federal troops marching by. They were unmistakable in their blue uniforms. With a whoop, he turned the chestnut and cantered in their direction. Several men waved to him, and he waved back in greeting. Suddenly, a squad of enemy cavalrymen came charging out of the woods. Franklin realized in alarm that the soldiers in blue were prisoners. They hadn't been waving to him, but trying to warn him away. More enemy troopers appeared. Thompson wheeled his horse and headed back the way he had come, but another squad came charging at him. Turning again, he galloped toward the far end of the wide field, the only escape route still open. Slowly his pursuers closed the gap. They began firing, and he heard shots winning past his ears, when he felt a harsh sting in his right arm. Looking down, he saw that his sleeve was torn and blood was seeping out. His arm began to throb, but he gripped the reins tightly and kept going. Then Thompson froze. Directly ahead was a ditch, wide and deep, and there was no way around it. He'd never jumped Rebel before. Now he had no choice. Leaning over the little horse's flying mane, he dug his heels and whispered, "Up and over, Reb! Up and over!" The ditch came closer and closer. The chestnut lifted high into the air. Thomas held his breath, leaning forward to keep himself balanced. There was a moment of peril as Rebel scrambled for his footing on the far side. Then on he galloped. Thompson patted Rebel proudly on his arched neck and looked back. His pursuers had pulled up short, unwilling to risk the jump for just one more prisoner. Horse and rider found their way home at last. Naturally, Emma wanted to avoid the hospital where she'd have to remove her shirt so the wound could be attended. Instead, she headed straight for the chaplain's cabin. Mrs. Butler, by now an expert nurse, cleaned and dressed the injured arm. "That ball nicked the flesh and went through," she said. "Nothing to worry about, my dear. You'll be fine." Over a cup of coffee, Emma finally began to relax. "Thank you, Mrs. Butler," she sighed. "Guess I was mighty lucky." The chaplain's wife shook her head anxiously. "You sure were," she said. "This time."